Top 3 things that ever frustrated me the most mixing vocals to a 2-track instrumental. No! And that is why I'm making this video today. I'm gonna give you the 3 most simple tips that I've used over the last few years. It's given me great results whenever I'm mixing vocals to 2-track instrumentals. First things first, relax. I know you've pulled up about 10 plugins. You maxed out your entire insert chain on Pro Tools. Let's go all the way back. First things first, you got to listen. The listen stage. So in some cases, I've listened to the rough mix, I've listened to the instrumental, and I come to a conclusion where there really doesn't need anything done to it. There's been certain cases where I've probably got some of my better mixes with the 2-track beat without even touching the beat, without throwing a plugin on the beat at all. So don't rule out not doing anything at all to it as a potential option. It may be rare that you actually do this, but you gotta listen to it first. And another thing that I'll note here too, just a free gem here, this artist has probably been listening to a rough mix they've got used to. They've got the demo-itis. You screw up the beat, you may get back I like the rough mix version better. I've been there. We can cry together. But in most cases, there's probably gonna be some frequencies that you're gonna need to kind of tame a little bit, boost a little bit, or it may not be knocking the way that you need it to knock. And we're gonna kind of walk through exactly what you need to do if that's the case. Let's go ahead and dive into stage number 2, which is the adjustment stage. So as I get to this stage, I already have my mind in the right space. I've critically listened to where things already are, and I've noticed that I'm definitely gonna have to do some kind of processing to this 2-track instrumental to make some room for the vocals to sit inside of the mix rather than on top of the mix or below the mix. So let's actually go ahead and play what we're starting with here. This is a track by Jesse G, produced by Jay Shirts. Super talented team. I'm gonna drop their social media links down in the description. But let's go ahead and play what we got here.
You seem like a ghost to me. 1 minute you're gone, now you close to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind all the time. Got me wondering if there's hope for me. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. You say I got issues you oversee. I'm sorry I'm not what I hope to be. I'm trying to be heard more than locally.
So first things first, what I'm hearing is there's a lot of low end within the 2-track. It sounds a little muddy, and it's not leaving a lot of room for the vocals to cut through the mix. So what I do here is I'm really only thinking through about 3 plugins. The top 3 type of plugins that I'm typically going to be reaching for here is some kind of EQ, specifically mid-side EQ, some kind of multiband compression, which I have the FabFilter Pro MB, which is their multiband compressor. The Pro Q3 is the mid-side EQ that I'm currently using here. Looks like I have 2 instances there. And last but not least, every once in a while, I'll pull up some kind of transient designer, which I actually ended up not using on this specific track. And a lot of times I'm going to be reaching for the Wave Smack Attack whenever I'm pulling up some kind of transient designer. So let's actually kind of walk through exactly what each of these things do. And we will be starting with the infamous FabFilter Pro Q3. In this instance, what I'm going to be using it for is some mid-side EQing to the instrumental. I really only want to adjust the kind of the mono frequencies of the instrumental here because I don't want to make this big of a dip with a stereo EQ, just because a lot of times that's going to kind of take away from the energy of the track. I like to have my vocals kind of sitting in the center of the mix, and this mid-side EQ is carving out those frequencies just in the middle to make just enough room for the vocals. Let's kind of play what we did here with the mid-side EQ here on the Pro Q3.
You seem like a ghost to me. 1 minute you're gone, now you close to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind all the time. Got me wondering if there's hope for me. You seem like a ghost.
Kind of what I'm hearing there is that was kind of taming that ukulele that was playing and was kind of starting to clash with the vocal. So nothing crazy there. Looks like I'm dipping right at 1.5K. I'm dipping 5 dB. And I have my multiband compressor here on before this, but since we're covering the EQ, I'm gonna go ahead and pull up this other instance here. I noticed that whenever I was playing the 2-track, it needed a little more clarity, which is why I have this boost here. Now this is a generic EQ boost. This isn't a mid-side EQ, anything. This is just a generic boost here. This is a mid-side EQ. It looks like these are just your generic cuts just to kind of make a little bit of room for the vocals here. So let's play what we got here.
You seem like a ghost to me. 1 minute you're gone, now you close to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind all the time. Got me wondering if there's hope for me.
So you can probably hear that the low end is a little bit more tamed, and it's slight. I mean, -2 dB, -1.5 dB. Very subtle, slight adjustments. This is boosted, a little bit more, 4 dB, just to kind of give the 2-track a little bit more clarity. In most cases, these are going to be very subtle cuts and boost. I mean, depending on the track, some tracks, it's going to take a little bit more work, but for the most part, these are pretty subtle. My general problem frequencies, a lot of times a vocal is kind of going to be sitting anywhere between about 1 and 2K. So a lot of cuts that I'm going to be making with this mid-side EQ is definitely going to be anywhere from about 1 to 2K. And every once in a while, if the low end is too much, sometimes I'll do a mid-side EQ anywhere from about 400 to 700. This is a little bit lower than 400, but it's just kind of the frequency that was giving me a tough time within this specific mix. So let's go ahead and dive into the second plugin that I'm normally going to be reaching for whenever I am treating a vocal to 2-track mix, and that's going to be some kind of multiband compressor. Multiband compression is definitely my go-to whenever I'm just needing to add something subtle or take something subtle away that's bothering me. This is a great way to make a minor or just subtle adjustments to your 2-track without affecting the overall vibe. So let's go ahead and play it without it real fast.
You seem like a ghost to me. 1 minute you're gone, now you close to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind all the time. Got me wondering if there's hope for me.
So as you can tell, it definitely just really tamed the low end. That was really the only thing that I was doing here. And the reason why I like to use multiband compression is because if you throw an entire compressor on here, the entire signal is going to get adjusted compared to here. You can really just compress the frequencies that need to be adjusted. So my typical problem frequencies here that I'm going to be pulling up the multiband compression for is I find myself using this subtly just to tame the low end 99% of the time. I like a low shelf, probably around 150 to 200 hertz. I kind of dip that to taste. You don't want to go crazy here or you're going to lose the life of your instrumental, the life of your low end, and you definitely don't want to take away the knock from the track whenever you're mixing it. That is a definite way to get a dirty email back from your client. And from time to time, if the high end of the beat, say some hi-hats are kind of clashing, getting in the way, sometimes I will throw this on probably around in this area, depending on the track. Hi-hats sometimes will cut through pretty heavily in this area, and every once in a while I'll throw a multiband compressor in that area. Didn't have to use it in this case. And plugin number 3, which I ended up not using. Let's talk about the Transient Designer. Whenever I'm using this, it's whenever I feel like the 2-track just isn't hitting the way that I need it to. And in that case, you may want to consider some kind of Transient Designer, whether it be a Wave Smack Attack, or I know some people use the SPL Transient Designer, which is another good one by Plugin Alliance. And basically what this kind of does for me in this specific setting, this is actually kind of my preset setting that I'm going to be using. Just going to add like a subtle knock. I'll go ahead and play it to kind of show you exactly what it does.
You seem like a ghost to me.
And obviously that's exaggerated, but as you can tell, it just kind of gives the beat a little bit more knock. For me, it kind of boosts the low end and the high end just a little bit. But normally I'm going to kind of set the sensitivity all the way up. That way it's not affecting it too much, because if you go overkill here, you're going to start having some bigger issues. So a lot of times, I'll probably have this dialed back in between probably about 10 to really somewhere in this area. And I set the sensitivity pretty high just so it's not totally changing the feel and the dynamics of the original sound. Another cool thing, whenever it boosts the low end and the high end like that, a lot of times it's going to make it a little bit easier for you to kind of fit your vocals inside of the mix rather than your vocals just being on top, over the mix, or a little bit under the mix. That's another cool thing to think through if you pull up the Transient Designer, if the 2-track is not hitting the way you need it to hit. And that will lead us into the final stage, which is the mix bus, aka the master bus. Some people call it different things. In this specific one, I actually worked pretty hands-on with Jesse G and Jay Shirts on this, so this is kind of where they had it set up here. So in this example, it's going to be called the master bus. So number 3, mix bus processing. I never want to assume that everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about here. So basically this mix bus, everything is routed right here. So my vocals, my instrumental, all routed right here. So anything that I add here is going to affect everything. You've got everything kind of in the ballpark, very close. Now we're going to be adding the glue on this mix bus. And as you can see, I've got other different plugins pulled up here, but the main things that I'm going to be talking about, the heavy lifters, is going to be through this Ozone, which is specifically some EQing and multiband compression, the SSL compressor, which is going to be just some overall compression, and a limiter. To kind of show you what I'm doing here with this Ozone 9, definitely specifically with the multiband compressor here and the EQ, this is definitely the heavy lifting here. Whenever I put this multiband compressor on here, basically what I'm doing is I'm taming the vocals and the 2-track to kind of glue that thing together with some multiband compression here. Then another thing that I'm adding here is going to be this EQ, which is giving it a little bit of boost in the low end, subtle boost in the high end. And literally this can be done, you know, if you don't have Ozone, you can just kind of pull up a generic EQ, whatever EQ you're using. Same thing with the multiband compressor. You know, if you don't have Ozone, use what you got. Let's play what it sounds like before and after. So bypass first.
You seem like a ghost to me. 1 minute you're gone, now you're close to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind all the time. Got me wondering if there's hope for me.
So the thing that kind of jumps out to me is the clarity. And like I said, the heavy lifting is going to be on the EQ, and the multiband compressor is also giving it a little bit of clarity just because the low end is a little bit better tamed here. And that leads us right into the second thing that I like to do on my mix bus, which is some kind of overall compression. Use what you got. You know, this can kind of be achieved with other plugins as well. This is just kind of my taste. It's very subtle. We'll kind of see what it's doing. I want to go ahead and bypass it for you guys.
You seem like a ghost to me. 1 minute you're gone, now you're close to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind all the time. Got me wondering if there's hope for me.
So as you can tell, another source of glue, just kind of gluing some things together. Things aren't jumping out as much. I feel like it kind of gave it just a little bit of life as well. I find it very helpful to use some form of compression on that mix bus as one of your sources of glue. And the last thing that I have here, and I'm using another instance of a FabFilter plugin, which is their limiter, which is the Pro L2. And basically what this is doing is just giving your track that overall volume. This is the final step of the glue on the mix bus. It's going to be kind of weird A/B in this just because it's going to get quiet and then loud, because obviously we're giving it some loudness here with this limiter. So before.
You seem like a ghost to me. 1 minute you're gone, now you're close to me. I feel like I'm losing my mind all the time. Got me wondering if there's hope for me.
And just kind of a side note here, with whatever limiter you're using, a lot of times I'm normally not going any more, maybe 2 dB of gain reduction here. Every once in a while, I'll go up to even about 4, depending on whatever limiter you're using. And that limiter is really just going to kind of pull up those volume levels and kind of push your 2-track instrumental and your vocals and kind of put them together is the final source of glue. So with that being said, guys, hopefully that added a little bit of value. Hopefully that made things a little bit more simple. Hopefully you can jump right back into your mixing session and have a little bit more confidence as you're approaching your next project. Feel free to go down in the description to check out my store. I've got multiple free templates, free Pro Tools templates if you're just getting your feet wet within Pro Tools. And I've actually got a more in-depth template for first-time Pro Tools users who may not have a lot of plugins, but I've went in and actually made a stock Pro Tools template that I've spent a little bit more time on, and I've also added a PDF within that download, just kind of walking you through exactly how I mix my vocals if I only had some Pro Tools plugins. But hey guys, let me know if this helped out. Let me know what you'd like to see next. But until next time, guys, I'm getting out of here. Peace.